every year at the NHL draft, there are guys that deserve to get drafted who just don't. However, this year in 2022 draft, I thought there were some relatively high profile guys that actually ended up not getting drafted at all, and it was quite surprising. The first one of these guys that I want to talk about here is Panophymus. Now, Fimus played on the Niagara Ice Dogs in the OHL this season, and really, that team was really just awful. But Panophymus and Daniil Gushin, one of the Sharks prospects, were really the only bright spots on this team for me. Now, Fimus had 14 goals and 44 points in 54 games played this year, and that isn't that impressive of a stat sheet. Those are definitely counting stats that make you think, well, this guy definitely could get drafted. But really, his shot is really good, actually. I think his shot is quite good. It's not as good as Daniil Gushin, of course, but he's already been drafted. And he could have had a lot more than 14 goals this season if he chose to use his shot a little bit more. He only had like 126 shots on goal or roughly something like that on the season, if I remember correctly. So I definitely would have liked to see him shoot the puck more because I think his shot was his strongest ability. But there wasn't really anything else in his game that I thought should really hold him back from being drafted. I thought he's an average skater. He's an above average passer. Sure, his defensive game can be weak at times, but he's not small. He's 5'11", 176, which certainly doesn't make him a big player, but it's not like he's some 5'7", 5'8 player playing in the queue who put up a lot of points or something. Like, he has a little bit of size, and with that shot, with that playmaking, I had him ranked 53rd on my board, and Elite Prospects had him ranked inside their top 50. So, really, this one kind of bewilders me. It'll be interesting to see what happens next. Maybe he gets an invite to an NHL training camp and they give him, say, a PTO, or I don't think they can offer him an AHL contract since he would have to go back to juniors. I'm not entirely certain how that works for undrafted players. Maybe he gets drafted next year as a reentry. That certainly wouldn't surprise me, but in any case, any team could have gotten this guy basically for free in the 7th round, and I'm quite surprised nobody took the chance on him. The next guy I want to talk about here is another one that really surprised me quite a lot. Now, some of these guys didn't really surprise me that they went undrafted, but Hudson Thornton going undrafted I thought was really surprising. And Thornton wasn't a guy that really blew me away when I watched him this season. He's certainly not a flashy player, but he played for the Prince George Cougars, and they're another pretty bad team. But he was actually 3rd amongst defensemen in points in the WHL, only behind Kevin Korchinski and Denton Mateychuk, and he led all defensemen in that league in goals. And he's also a guy not tiny. He's 5'11", 181. So he has the weight for a guy of that height, and 5'11" certainly is not huge by defenseman standards. He is on the smaller side, but 5'11" is definitely workable. There's a lot of defensemen shorter than him and much lighter than him that did get drafted. And overall, his counting stats are pretty good as well. 45 points in 65 games. Again, he led the WHL in goals amongst defensemen. Only 26 penalty minutes, which isn't really that relevant, but, he didn't take a ton of penalties, which at times on a really bad team can be hard to not take penalties. And a minus 14, which, given how bad his team was, again, that's not that bad. And really, you shouldn't really be relying on stats like plus minus to determine how good a player is defensively. But just watching the games, I really didn't think Thornton had any massive flaws on defense. Was he the best defensive defenseman? Was he a great two-way guy? Probably not, but it's definitely workable, especially with that offense he has. I don't know. This one surprised me quite a lot. I had him at 77. Again, I didn't really like him that much. He didn't blow me away. when I saw him this year, but I definitely thought he was worth taking a flyer on, even in the third round. But you could have got him in the fourth, fifth, sixth. I'm quite surprised. Elite Prospects as well had him ranked at 80. And he also is a pretty solid skater, like Panophymus as well, pretty solid skater. So these guys, they have a little bit of size. They're not tiny. They're good skaters. They put up good production. I don't know. Maybe they just got a little bit unnoticed because of the teams they played on. It's really bewildering. This is another guy. I suspect this guy is Thornton is not going to get an invite to a camp anywhere. So he is a guy to look out for as an overager in next year's draft. I think Panophymus is a little bit more likely to get a invite to camp, but that is yet to be seen. Now, the next player I want to talk about here is Bo Gelzma. And this is a guy who doesn't surprise me as much as the other two guys that he didn't get drafted. He is pretty small. He's listed here at 5'10 on Elite Prospects and 174, but he kind of felt a lot smaller than that. He felt more like a 5'8, 5'9 player, maybe this season to me. So I think that's the main thing. Combined with his mediocre production, he had 47 points in 68 games as a rookie in the OHL. So those certainly aren't terrible counting stats, especially for a rookie, a guy who didn't play at all last year, which might be factoring into the fact that he didn't get drafted. But I do think he has a pretty solid shot, and he's a reasonable skater as well. So I had him ranked in my top 100. Elite Prospects had him ranked at 79. I probably wouldn't have taken him that high, but I definitely think he would have been worth a flyer in the late rounds for sure. Moving on to North Bay Battalion forward Owen Van Steensel. This is another one that doesn't surprise me that much. In fact, other than the last player, this is probably the least surprising that he didn't get drafted. He's another smaller guy at 5'10", 174, and he did feel maybe that didn't quite play up to that size either, a bit like Bo Gelzma in that regard. But Elite Prospects did have him ranked 82nd overall. Now, he only had 34 points in 66 games, but North Bay was not a great team, or at least I don't really like the style of hockey they play either. And he was a plus 21 as well, though, and I do think that does reflect some defensive responsibility there. I think he's a reasonable player defensively. Definitely not a guy who has much upside at all. Most likely is a fourth rounder, I think. Fourth liner in the NHL, but definitely a guy that I think has a good chance of actually playing that role. This is a guy that I could definitely see becoming a CHL free agent signing once his junior career is over, if he doesn't get an invite to camp somewhere, which I don't think he will. I will mention, though, that Bo Gelzma, I'm pretty sure, did actually get an invite to the Florida Panthers development camp, so maybe that'll turn into something for him. Van Steensel, though, I don't think that's going to be an option for him. He is one of the younger players in this draft, though, so he does have a little bit more time to develop and maybe catch somebody's eye. Maybe he really pops off next season and gets drafted as an overager. I don't think that's a super likely outcome either. Again, I think it's most likely that he gets signed as a CHL free agency signing, kind of like Mitch Russell, who also came from the North Bay Battalion, or a guy a few years ago in Barclay Goodrow, who I believe also came from the North Bay Battalion. So perhaps for whatever reason, this is just a team that produces a lot of CHL free agent signings. But Van Steensel is definitely a guy that I could see takes that route 1 or 2 years from now. The last player I want to talk about here today is Hugo Havelid. Now, Havelid is the twin brother of Sharks draft pick Matthias Havelid, but this is easily the least surprising guy to not get drafted on this list for me. And the simple matter of the fact is he's a goalie and he's under 6 feet tall. He's listed at 5'10", 174, according to Elite Prospects, and goalies under 6 feet tall just don't really get drafted anymore. UC Saros, I think is under 6 feet. I think he's like 5'11", and that even then, I mean, UC Saros is one of the best goalies in the National Hockey League, but guys that are this small, NHL teams just don't want to take a chance on them unless they're absolutely, I mean, absolutely blowing their socks off. Now, Havelid did have a season where I think made him draftable. At the U18s in particular, I thought he was amazing. He went 4-1 with a 929 save percentage and a 241 goals against. Now, generally speaking, I don't really like to scout goalies. Goalies are much different than skaters. I don't really have that skill set. They're voodoo, if you will, but I saw him play in that tournament. I thought he looked really, really solid, and his numbers this season in the other leagues he played in also were quite solid. At Linköping J20, he had a 182 goals against and a 920 save percentage, 21-7 record. Granted, that was a pretty good team, but still, those are pretty awesome numbers in the playoffs. He went 6-2 with a 197 goals against and a 925 save percentage. So this is clearly a guy who can stop pucks, and the Swedish J20 level is no joke. It's not the SHL, but this is a guy who might play a few games in the SHL next year or 2 years from now, and if he plays well, he's definitely a guy I could see getting drafted as an overager, especially if he gets a little bit taller. If he's not done growing, and he could hit, if he could hit that 6 foot mark, I definitely see him getting drafted next year. And if not, we're looking 2 or 3 years down the line. This is definitely a guy I could see being a high profile European free agency signing. Kind of like, I think the last big one was the Sharks signed him, a Russian guy whose name I can't remember. Alexei Melnichuk. That's the guy who I was thinking of. Now, it doesn't look like Melnichuk is going to pan out in North America, and quite honestly, that just happens with European free agency goalies all the time, even the high-profile guys. But you never know. You give this guy a chance, he could impress you, and he could. Honestly, his upside is probably an NHL level starter. It is a long shot, again, given that size, but a large part of the reason that it's a long shot, I think, is just because of the fact that there's a good chance he never even gets a chance to play in the NHL. So if he does get the chance, I think, there's a pretty decent chance that he turns into something pretty solid. That will be it for this video, guys. Thank you so much for watching. If you did believe it deserved a like, do give it a like. That really helps me out a lot. I greatly appreciate it. I will put another video on screen now. If you guys want to stick around for a while and watch that, that's great. If not, that's okay too. But whatever you guys do, have a nice day.